Welcome to the next episode of Battleground Chats, where I talk to interesting people in the risk and resilience space. And today I'm really pleased to have Paul Perkins join me on our podcast. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Craig. Good to be here.
So you've got a really diverse and interesting background. For our audience, maybe just tell us a bit about yourself, where you've come from, and how you ended up in the risk and resilience space.
Of course, yes. That's a really interesting and winding tale. So hopefully we've got about 3 hours, if that works for you.
Sure, why not?
Cool, excellent. So yeah, I started out actually as an electrical engineer. Trained as an electrical engineer, did engineering degree. I was intending to go into the electrical industry. I think I applied for 4 or 5 jobs, one of which was in software. And I ended up really, really liking software job. That sort of took me into very, very low level C++ programming, device drivers, Unix, avionics,
good old days.
all sorts of stuff like that. So, my engineering degree kind of set me up for how to write code proper, not like the youth of today where it's all, completely abstracted away from the hardware. And I spent most of my career doing software or delivering technology projects. Started out as a games developer and worked my way through into, so really interesting jobs I ended up doing. Probably settled in electrical industry, developing software, large-scale software for the electrical industry, and did that for most of my career. Up until probably 15
And where? In Australia?
No, this was back in the UK. So I moved to Australia back in 2009, and again moved into, at that point, a project management role.
Okay, so let's not jump though, because I'm curious about this background.
Yes.
So you're in the UK, you've done games developing, now you're doing big software for electrical engineering.
Absolutely.
Where does that take you?
Yeah, so that the very first job that I did, and this takes me it's kind of a weird thread through my career, it takes me right back to the resilience piece. One of the first jobs I did in the electricity industry was for an electricity retailer, and we were deployed onto sites to deploy the large-scale back-end software, and one of the things they wanted to do was this weird thing called DR. And I thought, that looks interesting. And
that's an evil word, isn't it?
That's right. And this guy rocks up on site one day and he had this T-shirt on. It was a bit of a character. It says, on the back, it says, "I am the DR person. If you see me running, make sure you keep up." And I thought, I wonder what that's all about. And that looks quite interesting. And I was still a young fella back then, so I didn't really understand it. But as time progressed, I sort of got more and more involved in deploying large-scale technology, understanding resilience, as we didn't call it resilience back then.
No.
But, understood, how to deploy and test very high availability, very robust mission-critical software and systems. And sort of got more and more involved in it from a deployment perspective. So that was kind of most of my career up until when I moved to Australia. I came to Australia. By that point, I was a project manager, because as most people do, once you get good at something, you get promoted into leadership and management and all the rest of it.
So you'd left the engineering space by then?
That's right. I was then sort of in the leadership space. So I came to Oz working for actually an energy distributor at that point in time as a project manager. And did that for a couple of years. Then, just by complete fluke, ended up in the finance industry. I was working with a very, very trusted colleague. He moved to a financial institution, and I sort of followed him. Still in the technology space and still as a project manager. But during that time, I got to become quite good friends with the business continuity manager at that point in time.
Okay, I'm seeing a thread here.
Yeah, that's right. So we used to bump into each other in the coffee queue, as you do. And, one day, because I was a project manager then, he said, "Hey, we could really do with some help in the business continuity space, because we're really growing the capability and we want to put some rigor and process around doing it. And some project management would be really good." So we ended up negotiating me being seconded into that team, purely to just put a bit of a program together and do some planning and all that sort of stuff. And at that point in time, the business continuity function moved from, I think it was within one division, it ended up moving into the risk with vision at that point in
coming
time.
Together, yep.
Yeah, that's right. And so I started to get involved in not just planning and, writing documents for the business continuity piece, but started to look at risk papers and planning for risk teams and that sort of thing. And that kind of was the start of my involvement in risk. The team got restructured. I then became the business continuity manager. It then got integrated fully into the risk function.
Yes.
I then took on more of the risk sort of governance and frameworky background, this sort of stuff. And so I ended up then leading the function that sort of had within it.
Had within all the other stuff.
Well,
and
right.
So is your view then that risk and resilience go together, or do you think that they're better apart? Which is quite an interesting topic that gets debated quite a lot.
I think both and neither. I think for me, resilience is an organisation-wide thing. And if you look at, in the financial institutions now, if you're an APRA-regulated institution, a new prudential standard called CPS 230 really, has been launched, and that really looks at resilience being an enterprise-wide thing. It's an end-to-end value chain thing, and it really embeds.
Which is very much based on the UK, because
that's right. The UK were the first to do this. Yeah, so we've followed the UK, Singapore, all sorts of other jurisdictions around the world. And I think, you're right in that very much we're following probably 4 or 5 years behind where the UK is. So I've got that interesting insight into where they're moving.
Yeah, exactly.
But for me, I think resilience is an organisation-wide thing, and that's certainly what we are, when we talk to our executives and our, senior management across the organisation. It's a whole of business thing. And I think it then comes back to how much does, I'm in the second line, so, how much does the second line do? And I think for me, that blend just really depends on the maturity and how embedded resilience is across the organisation, because, for me, as the organisation matures, you should see the second line sort of moving out and doing more of the oversight challenge rather than the doing.
Rather than the do. Yes.
Exactly right.
What's interesting is a lot of our regulated entity clients are moving their resilience function or business continuity planning function into line 1.
Yes.
And out of line 2, and then having like a governance team looking after the governance of it, which is an interesting move, really, based on what you just said.
No, exactly. I think it aligns with that. And, as I said before, I think that really, is aligned with that maturity piece that, the second line should really then be simply the oversight check challenge of the first line or the business to, ensure it's being done well and properly and appropriately.
Yeah. Now, what's fascinating is you're not the first person we've had on Battleground Chats that has come from an engineering background into risk. And so how much of your engineering do you still use, or do you think there's a benefit to it?
Yeah, I think there is a benefit. I mean, I think for me, I did a I say proper in inverted commas engineering degree, and that was back in the days of oily rags and transformers and all the rest of it. As I sort of touched on in terms of, the development and software, I think for me, the engineering allows you to understand how things truly work and to use a bit of systems thinking, and to be able to understand breadth and depth and to, see patterns and link things together. And so for me, I think there are many, many different ways of doing this thing well, but for me, I find that, it helps me to be from that background because I enjoy getting into the detail and go, I wonder why that's the way that is.
Yes. Which you learn as part of your engineering.
Exactly right. As I say, being able to sort of go down into the detail, join the dots out to the bigger picture and the wider and the broader. And so, that for me, I think is a benefit. Of course, if you come from a different background, that's probably just as useful as well. But I think as well for me, an engineering background, you sort of have a feel for pragmatism and practicality as well. And understanding when is good enough. And there's always, the 10% engineering tolerance that, if it's within 10%, then that's all right. That'll do. That's all right.
It'll do. Exactly.
That's exactly
right. And so what trends are you seeing? So you're now obviously in superannuation in Australia. You've just gone through a merger and you've gone through CPS 230. What's your key takeaways to our listeners, or things you're seeing emerging in the risk and resilience industry?
Oh, I think for me, what surprises me certainly, because I've moved around in the super industry. I've sort of been through a couple of mergers now, and I think I've worked for 4 different super funds. I think probably one of the things I am seeing, which is probably a little bit counterintuitive, maybe it's the maturity of risk in general, but is the willingness and engagement from the business in risk. I think back in, when I first came into this practice or this discipline, it's very much a case of we're the fun police and we're here to stop you from doing the good things. Whereas now, I know, it's terrible risk people who run away. Whereas I now see certainly the fund I'm working with, and maybe I'm unique, but certainly the fund I'm working in now, people embrace you becoming involved and genuinely.
Is that because they see the value, or you've helped them to see the value?
Oh, maybe both. I think my philosophy with everything that I do is we should be adding value, and we should be partnering, and helping with whatever the discipline is that we're in. Otherwise, why are we there? We're just no bad. We have to be adding value to the business.
And if you're just gathering data for data's sake, it doesn't help anyone. So I totally agree with you, Paul. I remember running BIAs, for example, and actually seeing people who were there who didn't want to be there, but kind of having that light bulb moment when they realized, there's actually something I can take away from this.
Yes.
Whether it's a control that they didn't have or a different way to think about what they did. That's the aha moments we try to get.
Agreed. And I think for me, going back to that systems thinking as well, I think it helps if you understand, what the business does. So rather than rocking up to those workshops and go, we need to collect this data for this reason, this is what we do. If you can say, this is because this process is really important because of this member outcome, or because of the customer outcome, or whatever it might be, and you understand a bit about what that particular person does and link it to their language and speak in their terms, I think that helps as well. And just, really demonstrating the reality of what it is we do, and, going back to the term, the value that we can add through that piece of work. I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's one thing that someone listening to this podcast should take away either as a risk professional, risk or resilience professional, someone thinking about getting into it, or someone who thinks, that's an interesting thought. What's your one key takeaway?
I was having this conversation just yesterday, and that is that we get involved in the entire end-to-end business. We see it from left-hand side all the way through to the right-hand side. So, in one conversation, I could be speaking with somebody on the contact center floor. The next conversation, it could be with the chief finance officer. And we absolutely understand and need to understand the business from end to end, from top to bottom, and to be able to zoom into detail and zoom back out to strategic in 5 minutes. And for me, again, going back to that engineering sort of thing, that's what sort of, keeps me, or gets me out of bed in the morning, not keeps me awake, and gets me out of bed in the morning.
It's the opposite.
That's right. The fact that you do see everything and you get to know everything. And the joy that I find just being able to join those dots, that you see something in one part of the business that directly, impacts something in another part of the business. You never have the same day twice. You're never down just in the bowels of one problem all the time. You're seeing it from end to end, from finance to investments, from, telephony through to, facilities. It's just a real, and it sounds a bit cliche, but it's a real privilege to do the work that we do, because we do get to see everything from top to bottom and from end to end.
Love it. And on that note, that's a great way to end. Top to bottom, end to end is exactly how I view it as well, and adding value back. Paul, you've added lots of value to Battleground Chat, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Craig.